Hey, good morning.
Hello, hello.
How you doing today?
I'm doing well. It's Friday. How are you doing?
Doing pretty well today. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. East Coast
Yeah,
to West Coast.
exactly.
We're both
Yeah.
in the US, so hi to everybody else that's listening as well.
Yeah, I think we have a few people who are usually over from Europe, a couple. Every once in a while, depending on the topic, a few from Australia, but it's always nice to be, I say, multi-time zone and multicultural and multinational when we would do the streams. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, but I'm glad to finally get you on. I know, as far as I would say in general, like content goes in Power BI, you have a long running history of creation and design of some very high quality stuff in the Power BI and Microsoft space. So it's cool to get you on, being
Thank you.
someone else who does a lot of content creation as well. So happy to finally get you on.
Thank you. Yeah, I focus on things that are a little bit different than a lot of your standard Power BI people. I don't go wildly deep anymore in the development side of things. I did in my previous years, but currently I'm focusing more on things like governance, adoption, all of
Yep.
those sorts of topics. So everything that surrounds the experience to help make the developers be able to do a good job of control service BI.
Yeah, and I mean, like it. I think as you've said, there's sometimes a little bit of a transition over. I've started to do more content development, obviously, since COVID, with live streams and everything else. But there's a certain like part of my brain that definitely gets worked with development that I still like to do. It's almost like it keeps the knives in the drawer sharp, so to speak. Like the a lot of my video ideas come through client scenarios. The someone who shows me a picture of something or a concept, like I want this. I've seen this and I want this in Power BI. Like I've never seen that thing before, but given the
Mm-hmm.
limited tools that I have in this set, I will figure out a way to do that. And if I can, if it's a solution that might be useful to others, that gets written down as a video. So I think it's kind of it's a both end. Like I enjoy just putting on a good playlist and just you know smashing a square peg into a round hole until it fits, and eventually it does. But then also, like I said, it's nice to work the creative muscles to then ideally bleed into making stuff for YouTube or other things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can definitely make Power BI bend to your will with the visualization and or the model, right? Whichever piece of
Yeah,
it really needs to bend. So yeah, you do all sorts of really fascinatingly cool stuff.
yeah. It's I don't know, like it's nice to kind of almost like with the for me like a building a Lego set as a kid. You make something new and like, oh, hold on, let me Google this. Has this been done before? Okay, this hasn't been done. I just built something new that's kind of a novel thing right now. There's a I don't know an enjoyment to know that at least publicly you might be the first person to broadcast this idea or at least put a different spin on it, which is fun just to know that you've had a unique thought on some type of process of development. I'm sure
For
we could
sure.
also chat about like development and stuff for days, but as far as from your perspective as well, I'd love to hear a little background about you. I think that we can share with the channel for people who don't know too much about you or kind of where you've come from.
Yeah, sure. So, hi everybody. I'm Melissa. I have been self-employed now for just coming up on 3 years. So technically, my company is called Coates Data Strategies, but it's me, myself, and my trusty assistant who has been taking more and more things off my plate, which is wonderful. But historically, I've been the traditional BI developer. So, if we go back 15 years, I was that person who analysis services, reporting services, and integration services, all those SQL Server BI tools. That was where I lived. And, so of course, times have changed with all the cloud services, et cetera, et cetera. And, over the years, I found myself spending more time on helping to put the puzzle pieces together. And, oh, where should we put this data? How should we integrate it? So, what you would normally think of as your data architect role, or more maybe in the data engineering side of things. And then in recent years, I found myself, before I became self-employed and I was working for a consulting firm, I just kept getting thrown the projects of, this company needs help implementing Power BI, and what should we be doing? And that, a bit by accident, I don't know, kind of just became my subspecialty, and I decided to roll with it because I don't know about you, being a generalist these days is wildly harder than it was a decade ago. So I decided to create my own niche.
Well, I would say there was a great post by Brian, not Brian Grant. It's the individual who does a lot of the social media for Enterprise DNA. It was breadth versus depth, and
Oh, yeah.
yeah, it was a grid of like basically squares 1 to 10 for depth and breadth, and uh, it's a great way to just to show like if you go too far you can't go too deep because you only have so many squares to put across either out or
Right.
deep. But Power BI used to be the amount of breadth you'd have to become an expert on it would be here, so you could go really deep on any subject. But now, unfortunately, the your knowledge of an expert is becoming wider and wider, which means you have less time to actually go as deep to any of those one subjects with data flows, data marts, all this other stuff. So I totally get what you mean on, it's harder to be an expert in a single field in this software when even that one field has more and more components going into it that it's more and more time to learn. It's great because the product's evolving and it's becoming highly
Absolutely.
configurable, but there's a little bit of stress that just comes with like, where am I supposed to put my time to learn that would provide the most value both to myself and my clients.
Yeah. I just saw a tweet this morning from someone who said, "Hey, is there any Power BI expert who would be willing to devote a little time to help so and so who has questions?" And the first thing I thought was, well, what do you mean by that? For the exact reason that you just stated, right? That there's so much to it, that there's becoming subspecialties. There's the people like me who focus on the administration side and so forth. There's the developers, and then you can start to subcategorize those into the data visualization experts, the data modeling experts, the data preparation experts. And
Exactly.
we can even go into more shades of gray for sure.
And as somebody was just pointing out in the comments that I was just dropping into there, Brian Julius was the person I was trying to think of the name earlier. Yeah, he does a lot of very kind of like, makes you think kind of posts, and that was one of those that I loved as the uh, visual representation of knowledge bases. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I like that squares. That's almost a little bit more flexible because it's similar to, but different than, you hear the T person. And the horizontal part of the T is your breadth, and then your depth
Yeah.
is in the vertical, but that implies that you can only go deep on one
Hmm.
thing. So I almost like how Brian used the squares analogy a little better.
Yep. Exactly. And you have 30 pieces. Choose where to place them.
I like it.
Yeah, 100%. But yeah, I think this is the first topic that I've had. You're up there about, I think this is the 73rd, 74th stream that I've done so far, and this is the first one that will actually get into some good certifications. So I'm excited about this. I think it actually works well because I did have one a couple weeks ago that talked about uh, things related to the privacy levels and promotions and a few of the other types of stuff that went into it, like things that kind of involved security, but not actually officially security. So I think certification does go with it's the broader conversation of labeling and identification that comes with the stuff that you can apply to these. So I think this will be a uh, really good, natural conversation, continuing from that we've had a few weeks ago as well.
Awesome. Where do you want to
Yeah.
start?
Like I can flip over at any point. I think if you want to start maybe conceptually and give a kind of a high level overview of maybe some of the topics we'll be going through today, we can start from there.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'm thinking what might work really well for us in the audience is a little bit of a what, why, who,
Oh yeah,
how
let's do
kind of
that.
a conversation. So if we start with
Sure.
the what is it? And incidentally, I told Reid this earlier. I'm not seeing any of the comments. I'm going to rely on him. So
Yeah,
don't think I'm being rude. I just can't multitask well enough. So, anyways, in terms of
my job.
what, if you will show my screen for a second,
Oh yeah,
in
let's
the
go back there.
Power BI service, like Reid said, it is a little bit of a label or a tag. And where I'm showing you here is in my data hub. And so that's a nice area that basically aggregates all of your data sets and data marts. And one of the things that it shows really clearly is what's the endorsement for that data set or that data mart. And we have two types. We have certified and we have promoted. And certified is the one that I talk about a lot, but promoted really has a role to play as well. And it kind of depends what that role is. We can talk about that as well, especially when we're talking about who gets to certify content, because it can get tricky. So if we step back for just a second, anybody that's ever heard me talk knows that I am a big fan of let's reuse some data. Let's not create a new data set in every single report that is created. And so what you're seeing on the screen here is just a conceptual sales data set that's being reused by a bunch of different reports. And in the community, people talk about it as the golden data set. And why that's important for this conversation is when we start reusing data like this. And this one here is showing, oh, we even have more tiers of dependencies. We have what is other data sets that are being created from the original data set, and then reports later that are dependent on those. So we can basically get this chaining effect. And the more that we introduce this, the more that we have to make sure this guy up here can handle it. He is trustworthy. He is dependable. So that's kind of the initial why are we caring about this particular topic. So if we talk for a minute about what the two kinds of endorsements are, because they serve a very different purpose. The certified one, really, bottom line, you can use this content and it's trustworthy. And I actually want to elaborate on that a little bit more in a minute, because it depends on the kind of content. But bottom line, this thing is trustworthy. Whereas promoted is a different animal. It's more like this content's available. And it doesn't mean that it's not trustworthy, but it means something less. And so if I pause there for a second, do you see people with your clients using these endorsements a little bit differently?
Yeah, because and I think similar to some of the custom labels that you can also assign in terms of priority and sensitivity, I think people can create their own vernacular or language. Yeah, because those you can you know, it's basically it's whatever you want those to be. There is no book on exactly how to write those. But I think with to me similar with certification and promotion, uh, I think there are ways that Microsoft wants you to use them, but again, they're just checks. Like an admin can certify or promote anything. Uh, there's no review process other than whatever you place upon it to get any of those. But I do think there's some
Yes.
education, because sometimes people confuse the two and like, well, no, from if you want to promote something to make it visible, that is what you can do. If you want to certify it, you should have clear documentation on what it means to be certified. Don't just say that's a good data set. Well, why is it a good data set? Has it gone through any type of
Absolutely.
review? And then there's the URL page. Like you should have a page that says certification means X, Y, and Z.
Yes, 100%. So before the end of our talk today, I do want back to talk a little bit more about what should this process be. But you just said something that was really important. So what I'm showing here on the screen is one of the tenant settings in the admin portal is who's allowed to certify content. And there's a lot of times when we are talking about these tenant settings that I try to not be too heavy-handed. Let's allow people to get things done. But when it comes to who should be allowed to certify, for the exact reason you just said, that there should be a process, this should be limited. So this should be limited to just the subject matter experts that have been trained in what needs to be done. Now, you might put the Power BI admins in this group too, but in my opinion, I would not, as a normal basis, also add your Power BI admin group to just be able to certify content. And that might be necessary with how you do things. But if I had my first choice would be this is done by the domain experts and not by the admins.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, if we pop over to this data set and we were to look at its settings, we would see, whoops, let me make that a little bigger for y'all. We would see that as a property of this particular data set that it was certified. And see how it tells me who certified it. And this is just my demo system, right? So it's a demo user. Back in 2020, that user certified it. And so that's a better person, somebody, that's in the domain area for this particular sales data, that it makes sense as opposed to the Power BI admin. So if I carry on for a second about what exactly does certified really, really mean? So what I want to do is walk through, we've got these 3 types of things that we can endorse. We've got the data type of artifacts. We've got the 2 types of reports, and then we have a collection of things that we would put in an app, our reports and our dashboards. And you might say, well, yeah, okay, so the process might be a little different to certify a data set than, for instance, a report. But I would say it's more than that. And let me explain to you what I mean by that. If we start with that first column, the data certification, what are we really telling people if this data set is certified? What we should be telling people is that a report author, right? Because that's the next level down. That's the dependency that someone's taking on a certified data set. They're saying, I am willing to take a dependency on that data set, and I'm willing to trust it as my data source for this report. If we've certified a data flow, the next thing down from that is a data set, right? Mm-hmm. So it's similar, but that's targeting your data set authors instead of your report authors. And they're willing to accept a dependency and trust it for creating their data sets. So similar, but slightly different audience that they're targeting. We can keep going with the data mart. If you're connecting to that built-in data set that comes with the data mart, we're targeting report authors. If we're targeting my silly little Windows 11 bar at the bottom, forgive that, but when we're targeting the SQL endpoint, it's a data set author. So similar all in concept. But what I want to drive at here really quickly is, if it's a report certification, instead of it being more of a technical dependency, what are we doing? We're actually asking the consumers of the report to trust it to make decisions and act on whatever it is, for the purpose of the report.
Exactly. And I like the term golden data set, I think. And the other one that is almost the opposite end of that Microsoft likes to use is the data siloing, which is they try to prevent people from experiencing 50 reports, 50 data models, and an overburdened Azure account that's being hammered, and a lot of maintenance costs that comes with that.
For sure. And I'm not claiming that every single data set should become a shared data set. And I'm not claiming that that thing should be massive and complex and contain absolutely everything. What I am saying is that if we're creating a new report, we should think, is there data that already exists that I can use and not just automatically create a new data set because we don't know any better? So it's a big part of training the users in your organization. Once they're past that first, don't know what the right number is, 30, 60 days of let's just
Yeah.
learn what Power BI can do, right? Then let's start introducing, here's how you can start to be smarter and more efficient.
Well, and that's just in as far as that pipeline as a small digression, the fact that we now have the direct query over it, Power BI data sets and Azure analysis services. It is the biggest
Yep.
mouthful of a title that I hate the title so much. I just like to call it
Yeah.
composite models. Composite models, just it's part of the umbrella. But
Yeah.
because of that, you have every possible combination of modeling to be done. So it's downstream versus upstream. Like, if you need to, connect to a golden data set, add a little chunk of data, you have every possible scenario to do that with today. Then you can add it today and then have a conversation with the person who manages the golden data set. And hey, is this information that I added, is this useful to have for the company, or is it really just necessary for my team? And then you can figure out if you need to push upstream or keep it where it is. But because I
Yeah,
love that that got
exactly.
introduced because it reduced that the golden handcuffs kind of where you had to wait for IT to make the change. You can make a change today because of the every single possible combination of modeling can now be done in a lean report. But ideally you do that and also discuss with people managing that whether or not there needs to be an integration that maybe should happen in some amount of time in the future.
Yeah, no, totally agreed. And in that case, the one we'd really be worried about from a certified standpoint is probably the peer. The
Hmm.
slides that I'm pulling here just to help with this conversation, they're actually from a presentation, and they're up on my website on my presentations page. So let me show you if anybody wants to snag a copy of these. Let me just show you where you would find these.
Or yeah, if you're willing to
Uh,
share later, what I'll do is give me the link after this, and I will put that link on the in the description in the blog post that we'll send in
yeah,
here. You do a lot. You do a
perfect.
lot of
Yeah. So
diagrams, which is perfect for me because I'm a very visual learner. So when someone hands me 3 pages of like data set documentation, like I need, can you diagram exactly how these connect, and then I will understand it 1,000 times easier.
yeah, absolutely. So those are also, whoops, no, don't go into edit mode. I also have a diagrams page, yeah. And then my newest one I actually just launched the other day. So if I click on it, this is just a data mart overview, and it's really just what are the technical pieces that would fit together and formulate in this gray box here, basically represents the data mart artifacts. So there's
Hmm.
that one, and then the other big one, haha, and it is big indeed. The other big one
Ooh.
is this end-to-end diagram, and I actually haven't updated this one yet for data marts. So when we kind of look here for all of the workspace artifacts, yeah, it's taken a life of its own over the last few years. And one of these days, what I really should do is create like the zoomed in pieces that you can focus on more. And then the top level page is more of a summary. But life gets in the way, and there's just, never enough time.
It's always good to have a list of projects to work on as long as you can continue to chip in to and complete ones as you continue to add on to the list.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes, thank you
So let's see. What
for
if,
digging into that digression a little bit.
oh yeah, absolutely. So let's see, what have we done? We've said kind of what are these and
Hmm.
why do we care, right? If we're asking other people to take a dependency. I want to revisit one other thing that's almost a bit of a gotcha though. If we kind of go back to where we were talking about the data certification, the report certification, the different audiences. And then we've got the app certification. And that's
Hmm.
just a collection of reports. So, same thing as the report itself, in that we're targeting the people that are viewing the reports, right? So, well, here's the thing that gets tricky, and the gotcha that I want to make sure that anybody that might be new to this or is thinking about this considers how you want to handle it. So I'm going to go to this sales analytics workspace. And if I sort my items here by endorsement, notice that I have 2 certified items and 1 promoted. And I have a whole bunch more than that that's included in my app. You might already know where I'm about to go with this.
Mm-hmm.
If I go to the app itself, so the little ellipsis up here, and then there's an app endorsement hidden under that little menu. That takes us to here. And what I have done is I've said, yep, the app as a whole is certified. But what does that actually mean when in the workspace, I only have 3 items tagged as certified? Well, 2 certified, 1 promoted, and I've said the whole app is certified. What does that mean? If you have somebody that runs, this, now no laughing at my reports. My whole demo environment is all about delivering content, not pretty content. But anyway, this up here, I ran it through the workspace and it says that it's promoted. But if I go and I run this through the app as a whole is going to say that the whole thing, every report in the app is certified. So just kind of watch out for that and how you handle that from a process perspective. If I had my choice, the workspace and the apps would match, but it's really easy for them to get out of sync, as you can tell.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that just because there's so many different artifacts and things that can be contained in the app, I think that's an even a higher level, I think, of scrutiny that needs to go into making sure that everything below it has also essentially at least been given a review. Like, not everything in an app has to be certified that is in a certified app, but at least it has to have been, I would say, it has to have been reviewed or passes, again, whatever criteria is required for the app certification versus the data set certification versus, the data flow certification, which ideally each one should have their own criteria on whatever that means for the organization.
Yes. And so I've certified this app, right? And if we went over here to the lineage view, what we would end up seeing is that a lot of the data comes from a different data set in a different workspace. So what's the decision there to say, if the report is certified, do I want to also require the underlying data set to be certified? And usually the answer to that is yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's one of those where it's like they very often should be. Don't necessarily have to be, but they usually stay in sync with each other. Often a. Now, what would you say then? Similarly, like, because like just as a conversation down the stream. So like, if you have an app that is certified, you often probably want to have reports that are based off of certified data sets inside of there. Now, when you're just looking at a data set, I'm guessing, for me, I would say that it much more regularly will have a combination of maybe certified and uncertified data flows, just because they might have a few data flows that are specific to that report that nobody else needs to, and at that point, there's not really any point to certify said data flow if it's needed for something that is unique for that report, because it's just not going to be used in other places. But I think the considerations of that pipeline of how much certification needs to be inherited, basically up or downstream, I think stops between apps to data sets, and then by then there's just basically unique artifacts that might be created for the report, and at that point there's, like we discussed, no need to certify those just because they're not going to be used by anybody else.
Yeah. And then something I want to make sure that we talk about during this, so I'm just going to throw it in now, is this idea of when and who should we be involving if we need to recertify content. So when I went to the settings, you saw that I certified it in 2020. Mm-hmm. Well, golly, has that data set changed in the last 2 years? Well, you bet it has. And what have we done to recertify it? So there was a client I was working with last year, and in their situation, what the decision that they made was that they were going to centralize all certification in their center of excellence. And so
Okay.
even if the creators out in the business units, the self-service folks, truly published it, they were going to need to get someone from the COE to literally click the button to say this thing is certified. And that was their decision. So what we had to talk through was this person that owns and manages this data set is going to need to make changes over time. And we don't want to introduce this huge barrier, this obstacle to say, oh, I need to add a new measure. I got to get the COE to look at this thing again because it's certified. So the balance that we came up with was every 6 months, there would be a recertification process. So kind of go through the list of things that you would look at. But otherwise, the owner of the data set was allowed to continue to publish and basically take responsibility since they were the actual owner of the data set.
I wish there
So
was a few other configuration options for those. Like one thing that would be really nice is the for the admin or whomever certified it, like if you could put a timer on it essentially. Like in 24 months, you get an email asking like, "Hey, does this date like is this data set still certified?" Or basically like somehow expire the certification. Or even from the global admin level, like make a setting where anything that gets certified automatically will basically require the person who owns it after 2 years to come back in and just either will remove it or they just come in and click yes, it's still certified. But there's still uh, a manual check someone has to do to verify that it's still good. But I don't believe there's any way to do that today.
no,
Maybe you could
you'd
do.
manage that separately, yeah.
So one thing I would be curious about is you can see when you certified it in the portal. Is that data at all exposed with the API? I'm wondering.
Yes. So it would be in the activity log
Okay,
that
so
the property
yeah.
changed.
So you could do something
So
with Power Automate maybe in the API where you could fetch any of those into there and you could I'm guessing there's probably a timer option somewhere in Power Automate where it detects that and then automatically triggers something where it waits for a certain period of time and then sends an email after that to alert them. So I think it is possible, but you'd have to do a manual flow somehow to basically harvest when data sets are certified and then create a trigger to say 2 years after this date, send an email asking the person who did the certification to please recertify said data set.
yeah, yeah. And then there's the flip side. And this was somebody in my training course that brought this up a few weeks ago. And we had a fascinating session during one of the Q&A sessions. And he said, we've got a data set that is having problems. And we're sorting it out. It's taking a while. We need to decertify this thing. And so we talked through, well, yeah, this thing has become unstable. It has become untrustworthy.
Yep, yep.
And yeah, that means we need to uncertify it and sort all that out so that it doesn't have that tag assigned to it incorrectly. So that was
Okay, yeah.
interesting.
Okay. Yeah, both of those I think provide scenarios where again like you need to do an audit or review then of the quality versus when it was initially certified.
Yes, absolutely. And so that brings us to, well, we've said certified needs to mean trustworthy. And what
Yes.
does it mean? Like, what is that process underneath the covers? And if we said in an ideal world, and I laugh as I say this, but these two reports are both certified. And if we pretend that they're managed by different people, are they equally trustworthy? And,
Yeah, yeah.
even if we take a certified sales report here and a certified inventory report elsewhere, they're both certified. Are they equally trustworthy? And we're never really going to be able to achieve that.
Mhm.
But that is sort of our ideal goal. So I've got um, a template in my course that I'm kind of looking at over here that goes through all of this stuff. So I'm going to kind of give you a sense for the things you want to think about. And, the whole thing is 9 pages. So Things like, do we have ownership and support? And that includes, do we know who the technical content owner is and the subject matter expert? Because it could be different people. Provide support for this thing when something goes wrong. Is it the business owner? Is it IT? Is it support? Is it the COE, right? How does that work? And a lot of those are one-time decisions for support, but it also depends on different organizations have different rules of the road for decentralized data management and how far those decentralized data owners can take it. So making sure that that's clear. And then having some sort of documentation about this report or this data set and what should be included in it. And as a slight aside, I often talk about can be at different levels in your organization. Every data set is not equal, right? So it might be tier 1 content or governed content, right? Does that mean the same thing as certified to you? Might kind of a bigger question, right? But once we've identified all those sorts of things, there needs to be some sort of best practices review or tech review or whatever you want to call it. And we got to look at the data sources. We got to look at those data preparation steps. We got to look at the data model, right? It's going to be used across a whole lot of users and a whole lot of reports. So we got to make sure things sound. So a whole bunch of looking at the calculations, determining just because something has some future maintenance or is hard coded might not prohibit it from being certified, but we darn well want to have it documented and we darn well got to know somebody's going to be taking care of it. But sometimes there's some refactoring that needs to happen, right? When you see the ugly stuff under the covers. And then you just got to decide, okay, this ugly thing, is that a blocker? Do we have to refactor it, or are we going to allow it with proper documentation and support?
I was going to say for some of this as well, like in general, very often, like the things that I would promote are often usually things that are already certified as well, because you want to promote the golden data sets in the organization or the reports. But do you have some examples that you've encountered with clients or anything else when you would not want to certify it, but you still want to promote it?
That's such a hard one. So the biggest one that I've heard, and I'd be curious if anybody listening in the chat has a different experience, toss it in to share it with us. But what I continue to sort of hear is this promoted report, for instance, is used a lot of times by people who can't get permission to certify. So it's locked down, that admin center setting, right? So sometimes the decentralized teams use it as if it's certified.
Gotcha.
Because they can't get permission to actually do the certified. So that's where it kind of just depends on how that team happens to be using it. And if you're a huge organization, what promoted means coming from team A could mean something different than team B. Have you seen that?
Yeah. I mean, exactly as you said, there sometimes is a bit of a lock and key to the certain options that are available from the IT or admin centers, and if people aren't really able to do the certifications, they do have at least permissions more often than not to do promotions. So it's a way to kind of at least to guide people to use this a bit and kind of say, hey, I exist, test me out, even though they can't necessarily get that certification labeling as well. So ideally, they're usually one and the same. Like generally speaking, if you're doing a promotion, you should normally be wanting to promote something that has been certified, but that restriction I can see as a scenario, and I think that's probably the few times that I have seen it used only by itself, is when the certification is otherwise restricted.
Yeah. The other thing, promoting a report is good. I think it's fine. I think where it gets more advantageous for, let's say we want to promote a certain data set and somebody's in desktop, right? And they're going to go get data and they want to see the data sets that already exists and they're certified and promoted. Those will surface at the top easier. And that's where I think it makes, I think I've seen it more commonly to promote a dip more so than to promote a report. But it just really depends. Promoted is the one that, like certified, I can say, hey, you might scale down the list, but you should do these things. Whereas promoted is much more ambiguous.
Yeah, exactly. And as we discussed, like there's less documentation and not as many requirements for that. It's really just kind of holding something in front of the people who are in the tenant and letting them see that. But otherwise, you're just basically saying, "Hey, this exists." But I do like your verification kind of statuses that can go with that. But and it really just goes to the organization dictionary in a sense, like making sure that the whatever terminology or label or anything else is understood and clearly established for an organization with any of these things. So I like your little labeling that you put on these reports.
Yeah. And this one here, one of the things we talk about is, governed, tier one, managed, certified, right? What is the term that you want to use? And you might just say if it's certified, that does mean it's governed and we've gone through all these things. But you want to put it on the report. And then when this gains traction and becomes this thing that we know, oh, it's been certified or verified or whatever, I see it on the report, the people viewing the report are going to look at something else somewhere along the line and say, how come I don't see that little message or that little icon on this other report? Right? It gets to be this dependable thing. So one of the big
Yep.
things we got to watch out for is if people to download reports, use them as an example, and save and create their own, then you just dilute the value of this massively.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So usually I try to say, stop that from happening and attribute a template separately that's for that purpose. It's more work, but then you can use of labels more effectively. But how do you usually handle that sort of thing in your projects?
There's times definitely where, well, one, if you don't want them to download that, you could always honestly like I just turn off download the PBIX file. In general, the only time I recommend to do that is usually if somebody made a big oopsie and deleted the SharePoint folder or something else. But like, there's not too many reasons ever need to download those, or honestly export the data if you have a well-built report. So I usually restrict actions for the users in the workspaces to exactly what is absolutely needed.
Yep, absolutely. And then the other thing I'm kind of a fan of is deselecting this in an app, the allow users to make a copy of the reports in
Yeah.
this app. Because then if they're all branded, who published them? Are they verified? Right? You've got that same
Yeah.
exact problem. So one way around that, here it's actually easier to go and run the actual app itself. One thing that sometimes works is you can actually just put the PBIT link in the app, but that is making a huge assumption, which is the viewers of this app are the same people that want to create reports from it. And
Yep.
that's
Okay.
usually
Yep.
not a one-to-one relationship. So I have it here. It's my demo environment, right? It's good for conversation, but in real life, I don't think it's usually the answer.
Yeah, and like it's putting a band-aid on something to a degree, but like workaround should only be implemented if they're reliable, and I would think, and they don't cause more problems than they solve, right?
Right. So if we know that the people viewing this app, you know, 90% of them are not going to want to create a report from the data and the reports in here, right? Just surface the template elsewhere in your place where you have other resources for your authors, right? Just have them go elsewhere and then it's not confusing. But we still are, blocking download for preserving the trustworthiness of this kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Cool. Let me just kind of finish a quick run through of the stuff that we
Absolutely.
wanted to do in our process, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we said we wanted to do a best practices review. We got to do a formal data validation. So, ideally, you've got some sort of nice data quality dashboard, but worst case, you can say, here's what I did to check the source and check this report, right? Even if it's manual, right? We all have limits on our time,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes you just got to do the manual ugly thing. So data quality, those kinds of reconciliations, looking at how much historical data did you just pull in here? Do we really need it? Are we using common definitions and terminology? And if we're deviating, have we made it clear in the report, right? With tooltips or
Yeah.
whatever technique you want to use.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Looking at the data presentation, this one's a little bit tougher because it's subject to, so much opinion, but just that there's not the most horrible data visualization practices that you ever did see. Are basic accessibility guidelines being met? Are these things mobile ready, right? Branding is being used, right? All that kind of stuff. And then I want you to take it one step further than all that stuff that you could have just done in Power BI Desktop. And I want you to think about deployment and security planning too. If we're certifying this, what workspace is it going to be at? For this particular content, is the security on the workspace sufficient, right? Um, all those kinds of considerations, which there's a bunch of them. How are we doing change management? If this is certified, how do we trust that changes are going to be managed well? And do we have some sort of change management process? And I don't just mean using deployment pipelines. I mean the process of when are we touching development, test, and production, if in fact we are separating out the three,
Gotcha.
which we're more likely to do if it's certified, because because we're creating all these
Yeah.
dependencies. So you see
Mm-hmm.
this huge chain of way more things that you want to think about besides just taking a quick glance at that PBIX file and saying, yeah, it's good, we'll certify it. And then the last thing on this template over here that I'm looking at is a post-deployment review. After it's published to the service, all those properties, right? The description, the context, the sensitivity label, the endorsement, um, the location, the security, is the data refresh set up properly? So we want to make sure if it's certified that it's going to be smooth and consistent and reliable. And okay, so that was the quick rundown of the process, which can turn into be a lot of things if you allow it to. So chances are you'll simplify that, but that gives you some ideas.
Yeah, when with any of these, there's a lot of considerations to go into, not only making sure that the report is shored up, but then, like you said, workspace configurations and the certification and everything else. With a lot of this, I always say, like, start with as little information and as little permissions as necessary to allow people to get to the insights. The report, as little information as possible on the page to convey the information as necessary. The same thing with the workspace. Always start with the least amount of permissions. I have seen so many people like, oh, let everybody just make everybody an admin, and then they want to know why the next day the workspace got deleted. Or
Right. Right.
back
If
with
you
go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, if you go into a workspace and you see a lot of administrators, it's kind of hard to tell because I have groups that are aligned. And that's a conversation about whether that's easy or difficult, whole nother conversation. But if you have more than 2 to 5 administrators on a workspace, something is wrong. Something, you're knowing the principle of least permission, which is basically what the exam that you described. But anybody who has the workspace permission of contributor, member, or admin means they can edit content, means they can promote content and change it and delete it and all that kind of stuff, right? So
Hmm.
irregardless of that admin setting, anybody who can edit in this workspace can also promote it.
Exactly, 100%. Yeah, I think this has been a lot of really good information. I think not only just on certification, but I think more broad stroke on how the integrations to this comes in a lot of different ways and how to implement this with a lot of other features that can ensure that you have a reliable pipeline from basically core data to who this is being shared with. And I think, I mean, all of this really services just to have as a tenant with as few unique artifacts as necessary to get the information to the people. You want as little overhead and as few data sets as necessary to service, the larger some larger set of reports that then gives all the information as necessary to the appropriate teams.
I agree. I agree. Add as rigor and centralization of things like data as makes sense without just absolutely killing productivity for the people that need to get things done. So,
Yep.
it's this balance for sure, and it's not
What
easy.
And there's a lot of stuff too. I mean, I explain it in my training quite a bit. Is I'm very clear when there is a I'm telling you this right now. This is a thing that should be done. There is no like question. This always needs to be done. That's 5 to 10% of the advice that I give. The rest of
Yeah,
it is like, this is a best practice. There's going to be many times where you can't or shouldn't do this, but generally speaking, this is probably the default you should consider. And that's most of the conversations around this. There is no hard and true
yeah,
for a lot of conversations around certification or promotion or tenant configuration,
right.
workspace configuration, model design. It's it's a it depends scenario that comes with the client that is conditional based off of the environment. So I try to make it very clear, like, again, I'm not saying this is a hard and true statement. This is a best practice. Try to do this when you can, but I know that you will often not be able to do this thing. But it's just keep it in the back of your mind when
Yeah,
doing X.
100%. I'm constantly saying I don't have a perfect answer for you, but how about we start
Yeah,
here, right?
yeah,
And if you're making the conscious decision and got specific goals, that's a huge part of the battle through it, as opposed to just what's. But that actually, if I can take a moment to announce that we've got some new content.
ooh, yeah, yeah.
So the Power BI adoption roadmap for about a year now, and uh, I'll make sure that I have the links to this. You can add them to the show notes. The new piece that we are augmenting and slowly but surely adding content to is called Power BI Implementation Planning. Easy for me to say, right? And the two subject areas just got released a few days ago. For instance, Reid just said decisions around how we structure workspaces. There's no set of specific decisions. So what we did, we went through and we said, what are the things that you want to plan for at the tenant level? Things we would hope to be consistent. And here are some things we want to use at the workspace level. And so we've got lots more topics coming. These were the first two biggies to add to these other scenarios that have been here for a while and are also in progress. So we'll drop that link in the show notes for you as well. But I'm really excited about this because what we do is talk very briefly about a topic. And then what you want to do is you want to keep an eye out for this little icon and then the green check marks. And every section concludes with here's some things that you want to. So actionable, and they're the kinds of things that don't always have an easy answer to. Basically echo what you had.
Exactly. There's a good tried and true stuff, but I just linked people to this as well down in the chat feed. So take a look at this. This is a evolving set of practices and adoptions as far as the roadmap goes, and it's good to see that new stuff gets added into there. And uh, I'm really glad that this exists now. A couple of years ago there was a strong lack of documentation for a lot of the stuff at Microsoft, and I maybe 2 to 3, but I know sometime in the recent past that started to change and the documentation just got a lot better and so many more docs. And I think a lot of MVPs have, people have just been reaching out to individuals like you and Peter Myers and others, and just like, hey, actually, we want to make this community driven. We're going to put this basically all on, GitHub and allow people to actually make edits and, let's expand. And there's probably like 5x content now available there, official stuff, both in their Learn platforms and in the documentation pages where I love to be able to Google something and then the top result is not a personal blog. It's a Microsoft doc now that is like the de facto thing to send to a client, which makes it more reliable too, versus just,
Yeah,
you have to
it
trust me.
does.
This is a good blog. It's not an official Microsoft statement, but this is the one you should read. I would prefer to be able to direct you to
Right.
documentation pages when applicable on like X, Y, and Z as a feature, a limitation, or a practice.
Yep. But to read, yeah, all of these pages on the Microsoft Docs platform are hosted in GitHub.
Hmm.
So you can file an issue or make a suggestion, something that would change.
Yep.
Peter with Matt on creating all of basically these three here, the migrate, the adapt, and the implementation planning are me, Peter, Matthew, and then the whole goal of these types of things is to try to bridge the core docs, because what's important to realize is where we are at here is in what we call Power BI guidance documentation. And while we don't go wildly into our opinions as consultants and such, we are able to provide some level of you should consider doing this in a careful way. Power BI core docs, the product docs, their goal is not to say, here's how you should deploy it. Their goal is more to say, here's how the product works and what the buttons are and what the buttons do. So this is our opportunity to bridge that gap between the product documentation and real life implementation. So work in progress. Lots more coming over the course of the next months. If you are on Twitter, you'll see Matthew Roche and I make noise whenever there is something new that happens as well.
He's
And a
one
little
of
up
my
too.
favorite
I
people.
forget about LinkedIn. Yeah.
Yeah. Right before he moved, I don't know if you saw, like I recorded the video of it, but him, Will, and I Will and I got to get sword lessons from him at his place, and that was a lot of fun. Like, I did not realize how satisfying it would be to like cut through bamboo stalks, but like, okay, like the little 5-year-old in me was like, all right, I get to play with knives, and this is great.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, it's possible I'll get a sword in my hand. We'll see if he brings me one. So Matthew and I are doing a pre-con, so an all-day
Okay.
session at the Pass Summit conference in the fall.
Hmm.
And so I will put aside all of my anxiety about going to an event with a lot of people. Just excited to do it, and I want to do it with Matthew. So um, he always brings a sword to his public
Hmm.
presentations. So we'll see if he brings me a baby sword. I think if I need one, I'd need something like Needle. If you're a Game of
Oh
Thrones
yeah.
person and you remember Arya, yeah, I'd
Yep.
need something really, really little and not too overwhelming. So I'll put in that request.
Yeah, well, I'll be seeing you then. I mean, I live like 15 minutes from the convention center, so I'll be seeing you at Pass as
Nice.
well.
Yes, I'm excited. It's time to get back out in the world.
Yeah, and like, there's probably going to be 30 plus people that I haven't seen in years that I'll finally be able to see again at Pass. So I'm super looking forward to that. For people like not familiar, Pass Summit, now owned by Redgate, bought it.
Yeah.
Uh, Basically just like from the parent company was just called Pass, wasn't it? Prior. I think they just bought the brand.
Yeah, the origination was the Professional Association of SQL Server, and then when they branded, or I should say expanded
Hmm.
beyond SQL Server, they changed to just Pass. And you're right,
Yep.
now Redgate owns it. Technically, the conference is called the Pass Data Community Summit. That's kind of a
Hmm.
mouthful, so I think most people still just say Pass Summit.
Yeah, exactly. It's the phoenix that rose from the ashes of Pass imploding in COVID when they realized that they had like 5 years of reserved event spaces that they couldn't back out of. So the only way to get out of those obligations, you had to declare bankruptcy. Was my understanding. Like, we have not enough cash flow to make all these through COVID, and we can't cancel them. So that's why I think within like 6 months of COVID happening, they immediately just like they went under. SQL Saturdays became Data Saturdays, and Task got bought by Redgate and all that fun stuff. But one of the largest, conferences that happens every year in the U.S. for anything BI related. So it's a big conference, should be fun. And yeah, like I said, for anyone who is unfamiliar with it, just look up Past Summit on Google. It's a conference that one of the few that I would say is like worth attending, as far as just the information and also networking. Like it's a huge amount of people, and I think I know more MVPs coming to this event that I've seen go to any other one in 3 or 4 years. It's a very, very fun thing to do, and it's Seattle, so my hometown.
For sure, for sure. And
Yeah.
if you're not up for traveling yet and being around crowds of people, you can attend virtually as well. I know it's not as
Yeah.
much fun, but if there's certain sessions that you wanted to get the information, they're making it virtual or physical this year, which is a great
Yep.
flexibility depending on what you're comfortable with.
Exactly, and I have to, even though I'm presenting in person there, my lightning talk, apparently I do need a pre-record. It's on my task list at some point because I got accepted from a lightning talk, and that, which I thought I was kind of hoping that would be in person because I haven't done one yet, but I loved the idea of, like a 10-minute like just rapid fire presentation just to try like the muscles for that. Like, oh no, it's recorded. Because I saw them over at SQL Bits, Marco and a whole bunch of others. They had a 1 hour like lightning hour round where everybody got 10 minutes to do one, and it just looked super fun. So that's what I thought this one would be, but it's just going to be a recorded 10-minute video released online.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, guys, yeah, this was a lot of fun. We got
Yeah,
through
no,
Ariel, and
I learned quite a
so
few
thanks for having
bits
me.
from that. Absolutely, and I'd say like I appreciate your teaching style. As a presenter myself, I notice things where it's like pausing for clarification, giving space to like just think about this for a minute, even if you're not getting an answer from the audience, just like letting people gestate on a thought and then moving on, and then use a lot of visual cues, which I do myself and appreciate just because having flows to show like how things work, especially when you're discussing anything that's process driven, I think is very valuable to communicate with people when presenting.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Absolutely. I don't see any other questions, just people making little chats and everything. And I think our peak viewership was about 35 today. So we had a good, healthy amount of people viewing in on this. So this has been great. And yeah.
Awesome.
So otherwise, then, yeah, thank you so much for coming on. At some point in the future, I will love to have you back on. And otherwise, I'll be seeing you in 3.5 months, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, it's in
Right.
November, like the second week of November, if I'm not mistaken.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm very much looking forward to that once I get back from my other conferences in Europe.
We'll enjoy those 6.
Yeah, absolutely. And have a great rest of your Friday. And everyone else, have a great Friday as well and enjoy your weekend.
You do the same. Take care. Bye, everyone.
All right. Cheers. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. And if you want to help support this channel, take a look at our channel memberships as well. And last but not least, please consider sharing this video on social media to help pass on this awesome content and to help the channel grow. So until next time.